Good day. Welcome to study session 9. Middle English 1100 to 1500. Introduction. The Middle English period marks another significant milestone in the development of English in view of the fundamental changes recorded during the era. This study session is designed to acquaint you with major changes in English that made the language quite different from what obtained in the Old English era. Learning outcomes. When you have studied this session, you should be able to 1. Distinguish between the characteristics of Old English and Middle English, explain the decay of inflectional endings that took place during the Middle English period, and 3. Account for the predominance of French loan words in the vocabulary of English. Distinctions between Old and Middle English. The Middle English period, usually described as a period of leveled inflections, was between 1100 and 1500. This period is called a period of leveled inflections because most inflectional endings that characterized Old English are disappeared. In the words of Lorimer et al., 1994-13. The main difference between Old English and Middle English was the great reduction in inflectional endings. This development resulted chiefly from a change in the way words were accented. In the Old English period, a general or distributed stress existed, spread over the word as a whole, thus preserving the full inflectional endings. The Middle English period, the stress shifted to the first syllable, weakening and obscuring the later syllables. One of the factors that led to the great change during the Middle English period was a change in the ruling class, brought about by the complete overthrow of the English social and political system during the Scandinavian rule and during the Norman conquest. During the period, a lot of changes came into language not only as a result of its contact with French, the new official language, but also due to the fact that uneducated usages were not held in check. All standards of correctness were somewhat jettisoned, and the language followed the free impulses of the people. Characteristics of Middle English. Before trying to pinpoint specific characteristics of Middle English, it is expedient to reproduce the following lines of Chaucer's prologue to the Canterbury's Tales, Canterbury's Tales, written in Middle English. A neither then was, and that a worthy man that fro the time that he first behind to reading out, he loved chivalry, frailty and honor, freedom and courtesy. Lorimer et al., 1994. Changes in the South system and grammar. As a result of the shift in word accent, the final syllables of words tended to become weak and eventually dropped. Thus, the of the dative plural of nouns and adjectives became on, an, or, en, which later became weakened as e and finally dropped. Generally, unstressed vowels at the end of syllables disappeared. The development of word order compensated for the loss of inflections. As the vowel endings leveled, the classification of nouns disappeared. So did grammatical gender in favor of the natural gender of modern English. With the loss of grammatical gender in the noun went the loss of agreement in inflection between the noun and its adjective. Lorimer et al., 1994-13. Changes in vocabulary. The displacement of English by French as a language of the ruling class brought about great changes in the vocabulary of English. Many French words were borrowed into English. In fact, the vocabulary of English became more or less dominated by words of French origin. Many of the French loan words reflected things in which French influence was strong, such as government, law, religion, and military affairs. Thus, we have examples of such words of French origin as reign, court, revenue, clergy, faith, and sergeant. We also have lexical items of French origin creeping into the vocabulary of English from the fields of architecture, literature, science, fashion, dress, and social life. Examples of such words include sculpture, palace, pillar, romance, tragedy, surgeon, anatomy, clock, tournament, and so on. Also, words dealing with table and food preparation borrowed from French to English are words such as appetite, beef, veal, pork, pastry, broil, boil, and so on. We must note, however, that grammatical or form words such as prepositions, conjunctions, auxiliaries, pronouns, as well as many ordinary nouns, verbs, and adjectives were not supplanted by borrowings. Such items remained English. Apart from French, Latin also continued to serve as another source of borrowing into the vocabulary of English during the Middle English period. A potent instrument for this was the translation of the Holy Bible into English by Wycliffe. The vocabulary of English became rich in synonyms as a result of borrowings from both French and Latin. For example, the Old English word ask as a synonym inquire from French and another synonym interrogate from Latin. Study session summary. Middle English period 1100 to 1500 was a period of leveled inflection. Some of the inflections in the Old English had disappeared during the Middle English era. During this period, there were changes in the sound system, grammar, and vocabulary. This is the end of study session 9. Thank you very much for listening.